Hello and welcome to this week's lecture. We're going to be covering working with Asian American clients and working with low socioeconomic clients. Let's get started. So when we think of Asian people, what words come to mind? What do you automatically think of? Often the words or characteristics intelligent, hardworking, enterprising, disciplined, math, smart often come to mind. Regarding education, depending on what country you're looking at, education can be very skewed. For example, compared to other ethnicities, Asians tend to have a higher education until you start to look at some groups like Cambodia, Laos, etc. Those some of those countries that maybe are a little bit lower on the socioeconomic scale. Many individuals have not completed their high school education, and again, Asia covers such a vast number of different countries, as you can see in the slide in the picture there. And so, some individuals are highly educated and maybe work in the city, and there are some individuals who are maybe farmers and working out in a rice field and don't have an education. And so there's a vast kind of range of spectrum there, if you will. In terms of Asian Americans here in the U.S., there is, there's going to be Chinatown and Japantown and some of these larger cities like in New York, San Francisco, Chicago. On the face of it, it's like, oh, cool, Chinatown or whatever it is. But then once you kind of get off the main street or that front street, there often tends to be high levels of poverty rates and other problems such as juvenile delinquency and health problems and that type of thing. So there's several different things to consider and pay attention to when we're talking about not only Asians, like from an actual Asian country, but also Asian Americans who are either whose parents or grandparents came here or who are born here and raised here. And similar to a lot of other populations that we've talked about, what does that acculturation piece look like? What does that identity piece look like? Some of those things are going to be at play. So similar to a previous lecture that I did, I wanted to spice things up a little bit, throw some K-pop in here. I don't listen to a ton of K-pop, but it's apparently all the rage with some of the younger individuals out there. So if you have not been exposed, go ahead and take a listen and enjoy the experience of K-pop. We've discussed collectivist orientations quite a bit, I feel like at this point this semester, but it's worth reiterating that it might be important, specifically when we talk about collectivist orientations or populations, to not only assess that individual's view of the problem, but also ask, how does your family see the problem? And that might be helpful because, depending on what the concern or issue is, whoever's coming to you for therapy might have one view of that issue compared to their family. And again, this population, similar to some other populations, as I'll discuss here with the mental health bullet, often there's a low percentage, at least kind of historically, of individuals who seek mental health, typically tends to underuse services. Now, again, that is vastly changing and kind of across the board, especially with COVID. I think there's a lot more people who are open to seeking mental health services and who are currently seeking mental health services as opposed to maybe 30, 50 years ago. But historically, Asians tended to underuse mental health services. Specific with this population, individuals might see the therapist as an authority figure, an expert, and so that might change the dynamic of your relationship and your therapeutic process with a client. If they're, coming to you as an expert and expecting you to basically tell them what to do, that's more of an inequality in the relationship where they're expecting you to be the expert and they're expecting you to just kind of, similar to like a typical doctor patient relationship, just saying, go do this, go do that, this will fix you, as opposed to what we've talked about kind of over the course of the semester of how do we have that equal and collaborative relationship with our clients and work with our clients very collaboratively. They're, again, depending on what the client is expecting, there might be less of that kind of collaborative and more of like, you're the expert, you tell me what to do. So another aspect that is important to consider is, and I think I've touched on this in a previous lecture, with Asian clients, there tends to be more of a focus, or their symptoms tend to come out in terms of physical or somatic complaints, such as headaches, physical tension, like maybe in the shoulders or the head, pain, discomfort, fatigue, restlessness, sleep, or appetite issues, as opposed to coming out in more emotional or psychological, as a emotional or psychological presentation. So paying attention to and exploring that in terms of asking clients, like, how are your symptoms impacting your mood or relationship with others? Where do you feel those physical symptoms in your body, and does that end up impacting your mental health? And if so, what does that impact look like? Control of emotions is considered to be a strength for this population. So when working with clients, there might need to be more of an effort on focusing on the behavior rather than the emotions, or helping the client become aware and increase awareness of that mind-body connection in terms of, okay, well, you're experiencing that physically, but how is that impacting you emotionally? In terms of this population, kind of similar to some other populations that we've seen, things tend to be pretty hierarchical. And so, there's the, like, family tends to, the dad is usually the kind of the head of the household, and the women in the home tends to be, kind of very typical, like the mother. But again, it's gonna depend, because there are, Asian couples or Asian individuals who are both like high income earners and both work, which does end up skewing, if you compare Asians to other populations that we've talked about, because they sometimes they both work and they're both high earners, the amount of income that they're making compared to counterparts might be much higher. Their parenting style tends to be much more authoritative, and a little bit more strict, and so that's something to think about, especially if you're a therapist who is wanting to work, maybe with children or with families, take a family approach. Much more authoritative and directive, and so paying attention to how that might play out. There's much more this approach of, kind of this idea of, why should I reward you for the things that you're supposed to be doing anyways? Like, you're supposed to be studying hard. That's your responsibility as the child. As a student, you're supposed to get good grades, and so I shouldn't have to reward you for that. So it might be a little bit different, especially compared to maybe American parents or caregivers. So yeah, that's a couple things to be paying attention to and thinking about in terms of this population specifically. So instead of covering every single Asian country, that seems like a lot, I will just break into some specifically. So just throwing in some pictures of the Philippines. Looks really gorgeous. Love the color of the water here. But I'll break into some other populations a little bit more in depth. So China, psychotherapy in China is one of those examples where things are really changing. So psychologists in China are working to professionalize their discipline, and even have responded to legal restrictions and a very strong growing demand. So only about 20 people per million in China have access to mental health services currently, compared to 1,000 in the United States. So there's much more access to mental health here compared to China, and 80% of general hospitals in China do not have a psychiatric department, which is really fascinating to me, because imagine if someone is in some type of mental health emergency, most people end up going to the ER or the hospital. That's kind of the front line of defense, unless they're already in established care. But if you have, a sudden panic attack, or things have kind of been spiraling downwards, and you have a depressive episode, and you're not currently in therapy, then the ER or hospital would be, kind of that first line of defense. So it's really interesting, and I'm curious what people end up doing if they don't, if hospitals aren't the first option and someone is in crisis, if they still go to the hospital and they're just treated for the physical symptoms instead of the mental health symptoms, or if they directly reach out to a therapist or a psychiatrist instead of going through an ER. But it sounds like a slightly different approach here compared to how we do some things in the US. And also highlighting the lack of access for this population compared to here in the US. And again, historically, individuals didn't seek mental health as much as we do here, right? Again, there was this like, oh, are you going to bring shame on your family, collectivist approach? But I think in 2024, that is definitely starting to change. Angkor Wat. So Cambodia, I just wanted to add this in here because it's such a cultural piece of Cambodia specifically. It's a huge attraction that draws millions of people every year. And it is an important pilgrimage site for Buddhists from around the world. So yeah, I thought this was interesting. Wanted to throw this in here. In terms of Indonesia, something that's specific for here, and there's a lot of other countries that of course are experiencing this as well, but child marriage is on the rise in Indonesia, and this video is a couple years old, so it kind of highlights how that was and did become much more of an issue throughout COVID. And so that's something to be thinking about for clients that you might be seeing if they were child brides or got married at a very young age and then maybe came to the US, or something along those lines. There might be some complex issues or specific factors that might be at play for working with clients who are in that situation. So it's just something to be aware of and be thinking about. Of course, anime is a cultural factor that is huge for Japan, both culturally and art-wise. And I have been to Japan, and there are all these little shops, literally everywhere, with all of these different anime, like toy statues or collectibles. And so it's a huge part of the culture. We spent hours in these stores. So if you enjoy anime, then be thankful to the Japanese for creating some great TV shows. So I'll spend more time talking about Vietnam because we actually traveled to Vietnam last August. And so I've got a bunch of videos that I'll end up incorporating into this lecture as well from our time there. We absolutely loved it. It was amazing. This is a video of everyone drives these little mopeds there. And so especially around, like close of business or the end of the workday, you'll just see like hundreds and hundreds of these little mopeds everywhere. And they cross the street a little bit differently. So there's less of you can see in the video that there's a walk sign, and they do, they'll have the like go, don't go. But over there, much more people will just kind of go, and they'll just be looking for and you can watch videos of this on YouTube. They'll just be looking for the car, and as long as they're careful not to get hit by the car, they'll just walk, and it's like, oh, okay, we're going. Or a car will, like, even if you can walk, like a car might be coming at you, and you're just kind of looking at them and making sure like that you're walking fast enough or that they're slowing down or whatever to not hit you. So it's a very different approach to crossing the street than it is here. Anywhere I go, even if I don't understand the language, I really like to engage in the theater. So again, kind of engaging the art side of things in terms of music, theater. And so this is actually it was at the Golden Dragon Water Puppet Theater, and so you can see, I'll add in a video where you can see on the side the voice actors are like singing or talking. I had no idea what they were saying or what the play was about. I think there was 5 or 6 plays going on at the time, so I think this one had to do with a prince or something. I don't remember. But you can see how they're like these puppets and they're actually in water. So it was just a unique experience, something that was fun to go.
Rối nước sát vào rất tinh vi. Tinh vi lắm. Lặn lội chân đi tay con. Trỏ được nữa bà con. Này bà con ơi.
Maybe we cook by the steam. They steam. Inside had the water inside. Had the pot and put the water and they cook and the steam through. They cook by steam. Yeah, so I can have more.
So you can see me stuffing my face there. The food was phenomenal. It was absolutely delicious. Pretty much everything. I don't think I had a single meal that I was like, this was gross. Like everything was amazing. Everything tasted good. Would definitely go back specifically for the food. This is part of that tour day that we did. So I'll add in a video here of us being out on these little not canoes, but these little like boat things on the river. Got to paddle around and get a tour. That was fun. Part of this tour day that we had just went on and on and on. There's a lot of lanterns that are hung up there, and so part of this all-day tour was getting to make paper lanterns. They're not really paper lanterns, they're actually made out of cloth. So you stretch the cloth, you can see us trying to make it there, over this like wooden frame that's kind of very, like they're sturdy, but you would want to be gentle with them as well. So we saw tons of these little lanterns for sale in shops as well. So it was fun to be able to try and make one. We were terrible at it. The lady had to keep helping us pull the fabric the right way and that kind of thing. So in terms of strengths, there are some things that we've kind of already talked about. That collective approach provides additional family support, provides additional community support. There's this strong sense of family pride, again, similar to some other populations that we've talked about, where it's, you as an individual represent your family. And so what you do either brings pride to your family or shames your family. And so that's something that when you're working with Asian individuals specifically, being cognizant of how their actions or their mental health might be impacting them, or the decisions that they're making in terms of like, well, I can't say or do that because I don't want to bring shame on my family. And similar to some other populations that we've talked about, like American Indians, there's this desire and focus on group harmony as opposed to conflict. So this was released on February 28th of 2021, and it, as you can see on the screen here, it breaks down the different types of discrimination and how much discrimination increased. So women report hate incidences 2.3 times more than men. Youth, so individuals 0 through 17 years old, report 12.6% of incidences, and seniors, individuals who are 60 years and older, report 6.2% of total incidents. Chinese are the largest ethnic group that report experiencing hate, followed by Koreans, Vietnamese, and Filipinos. Two white middle-aged men who, so this is an example, two white middle-aged men who have been my neighbors for over 15 years approached me threateningly on the street, pulled down the corners of their eyes, and basically said, "Go back to Wuhan, take the virus with you." When I called them vile, it kind of became this, like, they called me, more names and threatened to beat up my husband. Another example, my boyfriend and I were riding the metro into DC. We were on the escalator in the transfer station when a man repeatedly punched me in my back and pushed past us. At the top, he circled back toward us and started following us, calling me "you Chinese bee" at me, fake coughing, and basically like physically threatening us. And a few days later, we saw a news story about how the owner of a tea shop in DC was harassed and pepper sprayed, and by the same man, and this man was calling the owner like COVID-19 repeatedly. So there was a lot of anti-Asian hate, especially because of COVID, and telling people like go back to Wuhan, or basically blaming them for starting the disease, that type of thing. Primarily it was a lot of verbal harassment, name calling, kind of this pushing, shoving, physical violence, and then you can see how it decreases from there in terms of like workplace discrimination, being barred from establishments, graffiti, vandalism, etc. And you can see here how it's broken down in terms of location. So most of it occurred in businesses, coffee shops, tea shops, other places of business, and then sidewalks, public streets, all the way down to places of worship. So in terms of addressing anti-hate, there's a lot of different advocacy things that we can do, ways to volunteer, ways to be active. A lot of bystander training came out as kind of as a reaction or a way to address the hate that individuals were experiencing. Going to cultural events and learning about diversity to increase our awareness around these things. Seeking mental health workshops and trainings, mindfulness events, completing mindfulness, voting, right? Because voting ends up impacting some of this in terms of how politicians talk about different populations and whether that rhetoric is positive or negative, or if there's discrimination within, whatever platform they're pursuing or presenting. So there's a lot of different ways to be involved if this is something that you're really passionate about and you want to advocate, either because you're Asian American yourself or because you want to advocate for friends or family who are Asian. So switching gears, we'll explore working with individuals who are living in poverty. Poverty is defined as individuals who are making less than $12,486 if you have no children, or individuals who are making less than $16,543 if you do have children. I guess technically fell below the poverty line during grad school. I think at one point I filed taxes and I had made like $6,000 that year, which was really sad. But obviously, I took out a whole bunch of student loans, so I guess, I don't know, it depends how technical you want to be. But at some point, for a couple years as a student, I was definitely in this population. So I really like this video. I haven't found a video that's quite as good. It is, I forget, I pulled it up and watched it the other day. It's about 10 years old, 12 years old at this point. But I really like how it graphically presents information and highlights how there's this wealth inequality in America. So definitely watch it. It's worth watching. It's about 6-7 minutes. But again, I like how it visually shows this inequality and how money is kind of spread out versus with like how the wealthy have money versus how individuals who are living in poverty do not have money. And since this is 10 years old, I would guess that this has changed even more extremely since this video was actually made. So classism, these videos you can watch it if you want to, but basically classism is the belief that a person's social or economic station in society is determined by their value in that society in terms of, so basically, you know, if you're someone who's poor, do you really bring value to that society? This includes social class oppression as well. So there's a couple different examples in Disney movies and other movies just to kind of show that. So specific challenges when working with individuals who are living in poverty or who are poor. You know, in terms of stereotypes, we've talked about stereotypes and discrimination quite a bit over the course of this semester with different populations. There, you're going to see a lot of overlap with this population as well in terms of, you know, TV, movie shows, the news. Poor or homeless individuals are often portrayed as being you know, lazy, promiscuous, dysfunctional, or drug addicts. You know, this idea that, oh, you're using your food stamps and going and buying drugs or alcohol with them, that type of thing. So either being lazy or this misuse or abuse of, you know, any type of resources that someone might have access to. Access to education and resources is often limited. So think about how much school costs. Some of you guys might be very familiar with that, being students right now. And even if you are getting student loans or financial aid, that doesn't always necessarily cover all the bills, right? I just talked about being a grad student, and yeah, student loans covered my bills, but it's not like there was a lot of money left over to, you know, go enjoy, you know, events or really engage in some fun activities. And it's not like there was very much time to work part-time in order to make extra money. As well as, you know, if you come from a very poor family, a lot of times people are working 3 to 4 jobs to be able to make ends meet. So if you're working so much, when do you have time to go to class or complete assignments? Or if you're the first person in your family who's attending college, you might not have a role model or someone to go to or turn to who's helping you navigate the system and complete paperwork. So there are multiple challenges or facets to challenges in terms of educational inequalities for individuals who are coming from a low income or poverty background. Graduation rates for low income students are much lower as compared to individuals who are middle or upper class. So essentially, individuals who are coming from a lower class background don't graduate as often, like percentage wise, compared to other individuals from higher economic status. Poverty results in a number of life stressors, not surprisingly, such as worrying about being able to pay the bills, being able to make ends meet, having to choose and prioritize. Do I you know, pay my cell phone in order to answer phone calls from my boss or make phone calls for work, especially if someone is maybe working part-time or working remotely, I mean. Or do you prioritize putting food on the table or keeping the electricity on or putting gas in your car to be able to make it to or from work? Now, some of this might have changed a little bit, right? Like remote work is so prevalent now, and so, you know, that might be able to help some people in terms of, you know, not having to put gas in your car because you can just work from home or work remotely. But again, that's going to hugely be dependent on what your job is, right? If you're, say, a waitress or you work at a hotel as a cleaner, you still have to drive to and from work. So some individuals or some career fields might not have experienced very much change because of COVID as other career fields. All right, we talked about worrying about being able to pay bills. Of course, there's discrimination, family conflict, inadequate or poor quality housing. So for example, if you know, are lower income, you probably can't, afford to live in a nicer neighborhood or live in a nicer apartment. You might end up with a landlord that is a slumlord, basically. So poor quality housing, inadequate housing, maybe having to move frequently if you can't find housing that is adequate. Some of those types of struggles might be present. For individuals who are on Section 8 or some type of housing voucher, again, either you're working with sometimes owners who are slumlords, or because of how slow the system moves in terms of, being able to get your voucher approved. Oftentimes, any housing that you would, like a neighborhood that you would want to live in, the landlord has found someone else who can just pay out of pocket. And so rental units where you would want to live often, you're not able to access because they end up going faster than like the city can move to get you approved for that specific address. Individuals living in poverty may have limited access to mental health treatment. Wait times might be really long for therapists who do provide pro bono work, so like free work. Or for community settings, I've heard wait times up to like 4 months, 6 months, really long time. If you have transportation issues or inflexible work schedules or lack of health insurance, all of those things can be barriers to accessing mental health services. Bail, in terms of disparities in the judicial system, bail can be one form of discrimination, as wealthier people can afford to pay for bail, but poor individuals often can't afford it, right? If you're living paycheck to paycheck and you make a pro-life decision and your bail is $2,000, more than likely you can't afford that, and you're just going to end up sitting in a jail cell waiting until your trial happens because you can't afford to bail yourself out, or family members can't afford to bail you out. If you're unable to afford health care or insurance, or can't afford copays for doctor's visits, then, if you've got some type of medical issue going on and that issue goes untreated, it's going to more than likely continue to get worse, and then it just becomes this downward spiral where your medical issues are getting worse and worse, and where it was maybe an issue that wasn't that serious, now it's becoming a serious issue because you can't afford to go get it fixed or looked at, or can't afford the medication. Often individuals on food stamps are shamed or treated a certain way. There might be these, negative beliefs or attitudes about people misusing their food stamps. I kind of touched on this at the beginning. Generally speaking, I would say most people who are on food stamps, they're using the program as it was intended, not misusing it. But there are different, and your textbook talks about this, like different states who propose additional rules, like, this person can only take out $25 from an ATM, or can only spend, your food stamps on certain things, so you can't buy, say, for example, energy drinks or certain things. And some of those restrictions, I understand the idea behind it is to make sure that people aren't misusing or abusing the system. But some things, like if you're limiting how much someone can take out from an ATM, now you're resulting in potentially increased issues if that person has to now pay for additional gas or additional time to continue to have to go back to an ATM to be able to pull money out if they need money for something. So I think it's kind of this balancing act of how do we provide resources, and recognize that there are going to be some people who are going to abuse the system, but there are also individuals who definitely need it to be able to put food on the table for their family. I read this book in grad school and I found it really fascinating. It had some negative critiques in the sense that, so this lady basically kind of went undercover, and so it's her own experience. It's not like this rigorous research study, which is kind of the limitation. But she basically went, I forget what city she went to, but she went to 3 different cities as 3 different jobs. So in one she was a waitress, in one she was the cleaning lady, and one she was a Walmart associate. And I think the Walmart associate, so I can't remember now, but I want to say that she did each of those for like 3 months, or each of them for a month long. I can't remember. One of them, I want to say maybe the Walmart associate, she ended up cutting it short and didn't complete the full time frame that she was going to do. again, it's been a while since I read the book, but I did find it really interesting. And basically, for each of those jobs, she essentially proved like, I'm not making a living wage, even though I'm working my butt off to try and make a living wage. I'm still ending up paycheck to paycheck and just not making it. So yeah, it was a really interesting book. There's probably YouTube videos about it, but worth checking out and reading if this is a topic that really interests you. And here are the discussion questions for this week. You can see that you've got a couple different options to choose from. Please let me know if you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns. Thank you.